Took that guy long enough. Bam! First cast with the old crankbait. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Rolling crankbaits and some crankbait setups for you. Stay tuned, it's coming up. Alrighty y'all, Lou here from Beyond the Bounds. This is a channel geared towards bass fishing gear reviews, tournament footage, helpful tips and tricks, much like the one you're about to see right now. So if you like that sort of thing, go down and hit that subscribe button. Also give me a thumbs up, really appreciate it. As I was saying, today we're going to be talking about square bill crankbaits and just springtime cranking in general. Right now I just happen to be throwing the Berkley Pitbull. It's a 7.5 foot diving crankbait. It's kind of one of my favorites to throw, but since I'm fishing a reservoir, I need something that gets down just a little bit deeper than your 5 foot range, and that's why I generally opt for this one when I'm fishing here. But I've also got a 5XD tied on just in case. So like maybe a Rapala DT10 would be another one to throw. Crankbait I got a lot of confidence in is the Berkley Pitbull here. I think they changed the name. I like these pliers because they're really lightweight. So they're lightweight to use, but at least he's kind of feeding up a little bit. Look at my eye. Right there. Pitbull 7.5, and since I'm fishing in a deeper reservoir, you know, I want something that's going to get down a little bit deeper. So I went with that guy, throwing that on my Mag 2 crankbait rod. All right guys, so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the basics of crankbaiting. It can be seriously as simple as just crank and wind, and plugging your cast just continuously down the bank. But the other thing you want to make sure you do is utilize a crankbait around wood. And you see right here, I'm utilizing around wood. And what you'll do is you'll kind of crank it down, and once you feel it deflect off that wood, that's when that bite's gonna come. Do not be afraid to throw this big old treble hook bait around wood, because you are missing out on a great bite. It's a bite that you can cover a lot of water and draw fish out with. Crankbait bite too is something like you want to cast it right up there on the shore. I mean, you want to hit right where that water and the bank meet. But if you reel it slow, what you'll find up is happening is when that tension builds up on it, you know you're kind of coming over some wood, or maybe that line's kind of, the bait's down but the line's up over the wood. Kind of, this is what you get. Bait's down here, line's up here, and you'll feel it come over. And so long as you slow down and just feel it, bam, this thing will roll right over. And a lot of times that's when you're going to generate your strikes. It's just like ripping baits out of grass. It's the same concept here. I was literally just stopped my I was sitting here talking to you guys about this, and I was going to start something else, and then sure enough this guy came out a decent ways. I mean, he hit this. We're still in that same area, you can see it right here. And he just came out and smoked this thing out in deeper water. So bam, that stinks, because I was sitting here talking to you about it and I just stopped my camera. Now when you're looking for a rod to crank with, I'm cranking with a 7.6 medium. This is the medium heavy moderate fast, and you need a rod with some good bend to it, right? You need to have that bow up and load up on that fish so that when you sweep into it, you got them hooked. This is a little bit long for a crankbait, for square bill crankbaiting. I'd actually prefer something in that 6'10" to 7 foot range, but you know, I like slow gear ratios for all of my cranking. However, with a square bill crankbait, when you're doing this, you can go with a little bit higher of a ratio. Matter of fact, the other day, I was whacking them pretty good on this setup. This is the Hank Parker Signature Series rod, $40 rod. Got it at Walmart, and I was just smoking fish on a little small Rapala shallow diving 3 foot BX Brat up on the Potomac on this combo, and it's a 7.5 to 1. With square bill crankbaits, you know, you're covering a lot of water, so having a faster gear ratio, you know, a 6.8, 7.3, you know, 7.5 is what Lou's offers. I'm actually cranking with a this is a 5.6 because this is my more deep water crankbait rod, and I just don't, I've got some coming on the way, and you know, once I get those, then I'll use those. But also let's talk a little bit about line too. Depending on kind of what you're cranking. If you're cranking grass flats that are 2 feet of water and you want to keep that bait up higher, use a thicker mono or a thicker fluorocarbon. You know, I typically will go about 17 pound in grass on the Potomac, even 20 pounds. That'll help keep that shallow diving crankbait up. You can pop it up out of the grass. Right here's a perfect example where you'd want to crank. And you want, when you're cranking, a lot of time, pay real close attention to these transition lines. You see that I've got kind of rock, mud, rock. You know, that's where you're going to want to position your casts a lot of the time, is on some of this transition zones. Because generally a transition up on shore actually extends out into the water a lot of the time. But this is a main primary point as you're coming back into a little cove. As I turn around, you can see that. But what you want to do is make some casts across these points to see if there's anything up shallow. And then as you kind of parallel and pull out, you can make some deeper casts on it. But always going across that, because what ends up always happening with fish is that fish move up onto stuff. They move up from deep water into shallow water to feed. Talk about like casting patterns here for this. Of course, one of the best ways to do it is to always parallel the bank, especially if you're in a deep reservoir situation. But sometimes you could be in a flat and you need to cover a lot of water, so you know the parallel won't quite do it there. The one thing I want you to kind of see is kind of this little cove right here straight in front of me. He kind of bends in here, goes out to a little bit of a point. You know, I don't want to take the boat into that. I kind of want to cut across this to that point over there, because that actually will allow me to cover the things that are inside of here and make casts that come across this whole area. And therefore my casts are going to be a lot more efficient if I do it in this manner. And I'm covering a lot more water. The more water you can cover, especially with a crankbait, especially with a moving bait, a swimming bait, is going to produce more fish. It's going to up your percentage chances. I mean, there's so many things that you can do in fishing about upping those percentages, and man, that is so extremely important. I mean, that's why people run, you know, big glass rigs right here. You think about it, like, okay, if I can cover even 10% more water sometime in a day just by going fast, is that going to be more effective for me? Is that going to raise my percentage? You know, if I get a live scope or this new 360 imaging that I just picked up, you know, is that going to increase my percentages? So make casts in a way that increase your percentages of getting bit, whether that be parallel in the bank if need be, or, you know, at a 45 off the front of the boat. All right, so let's talk about some other factors for crankbait fishing. Water clarity. You know, crankbaits are actually shine in dirty water. That's when you want to pick one up, especially a square bill crankbait. You want to pick one up and then start throwing that, because it gives off a lot of vibration, a lot of rattle. It makes a lot of noise so that fish can find and locate that bait. But don't think that it's just a muddy water or a dirty water kind of bait. It'll actually work in clear water just as good sometimes, if not better. Another key thing to remember with crankbait fishing is that you want to be making that bottom contact. The better you can feel that bottom, the more likelihood you're going to get a reaction strike, because that crankbait, that square bill, is going to deflect off of something, and that's what's going to allow you to pick up that fish that you essentially triggered into biting. You know, a good crankbait strategy is, especially when you know that you're actually on a good crankbait bite, to have several tied on. One, it just allows you to target different depths in the water column, but two, it gives you two different looks, two different presentations, so that if you maybe miss one, or, you know, maybe that fish just wasn't interested in that color, you know, you throw the same kind of color right next to it, or a different kind of color right next to it, you run the chance of getting and picking up another fish because you threw something at them that they weren't expecting. Right there, you can see I'm kind of in this tree right now, and, you know, just pausing, letting my crankbait come out, and then re-reeling again, you know, allowed me to stay in this position, not get hung up, not have to ruin the spot that I'm trying to fish right now. But I can't stress that enough, how key that is with these crankbaits. When you're cranking them around wood, just crank it slow, you know, feel as you go, and then when that starts to come over that wood, just slow it down, and if it starts to feel getting stuck, then let go of it and let it float back up a little bit, and then keep it going. Deadly combination around wood, guys. Stay down. Stay down. Oh, another one. Switched up the old cranks there. Like I said, you know, you're rolling 2 different cranks. You need to be rolling several. You need to be rolling several cranks. Primary points right there have definitely come in handy. I'm cranking this crankbait. You can kind of see it extends out, and I was kind of throwing out there. Like I said, he hit it kind of towards the top. They're always moving up on top of things to feed. And look at that belly right there. You read into your crankbait bite there, see that he's feeding up. But you also evaluate this too from a crankbait perspective. You can see that it's a long tapering point that you know it's going to go out there. I can see on my 360 that I'm sitting in about 14 feet. I was actually sitting in about 20 feet when I caught that guy. So I might need to get it a little bit further out there, get the boat, reposition the boat so that I'm not on top of the fish. Although he did come from the top there. But when you're approaching a point and you're fishing a point, I mean, the whole point's game, but you know, sometimes the most sharpest tip point of the point itself, and especially in the, I mean, we're in the spring, this is a springtime pattern, primary and secondary points for crankbait fishing. Well, you know, you want to make different casts across this point to bring it over onto the deep side. I've got the wind pushing this side that's producing current. Fish are going to position themselves into current majority of the time. Doesn't mean they're always going to be doing it, but you know, what did I say earlier about presenting high percentage shots, high percentage chances? That's what you're doing. I switched to a different crankbait so that I could get this crankbait down more. Now I'm back in 20 feet of water. So we're going to keep making a few cranks on here to see if there's not more than one fish on this point. Another thing you want to be cognizant of anytime you're cranking is your rod tip position, because as you're shallower, you want to kind of keep it a little bit higher, but as you come off and you start losing bottom content, drop your rod tip down. That's going to allow you to continuously get contact with the bottom for as deep as your crank will go. A lot of people are going to be wondering what a bite kind of feels like, and with these rods, what you'll feel like is it'll kind of load up, but it'll also kind of feel like, wait a second, I got kind of like a wet rag feel to it. You know, that's more than likely a fish, because the bend in these rods allows this to load up really well, and that's why you want to have a crankbait rod for this application. All right guys, so I hope you enjoyed that video about crankbait techniques. If you did, please give me a like down below, subscribe to the channel. As always, don't back up, don't back down. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you around.